So next we come to one of my favorite topics, the Vikings. I'm endlessly fascinated by them and their descendants, the Normans. So the first attacks into England came in the island of Lindisfarne, which was actually an Irish descended monastery in the north of England. They then attacked Rathlin Island in the north of Ireland, and gradually then attacked a lot of different places. Now, I won't get into the debate about whether the Vikings were savages, settlers, traders, or what. They were actually all of those things, but that's for another day. They founded the city of Dublin, they founded the cities of Wexford, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick, and they were the major cities of Ireland at the time. And as a slight aside, I will say this, that the only city in Ireland really, if you visit today, we didn't build a lot of cities in the early days. If you want to visit a truly Irish city, the city of Galway is probably the closest to a really Irish city. So at this point, the Vikings controlled large parts of the west of Scotland. They controlled the Isle of Man. They controlled a kingdom in York, and they controlled Norfolk. And again, you'll see that that part of England has now been influenced by the Vikings. And there was an actual kingdom down there called King Canute's kingdom, and it was part of Denmark and Norway. So going on from that now, to me, the modern history of these islands begins at this point of the arrival of the Normans. I would stress, and just as a slight aside, when you look at cultural similarity and difference, people are often struck, and outsiders certainly, we'll talk a little bit about the differences later, but there are a lot of similarities between the Irish and the English and all of the other people on these islands. And some of those things are like we're a fairly stoical people. We like, our sport tends to be rough. Come back to sport later on. We probably have a similar attitude to alcohol underlying it, and I often wonder, it's an unproven, just purely a theory on my part, that some of the similarities, things like humor, come from the early days and from when we were pretty much the same people. So the Normans arrived in 1066. I think most people will probably be familiar with this period in history, and the Normans arrived via the Battle of Hastings. At this stage, England was largely Anglo-Saxon, and they arrived in Scotland in 1072 and in Wales shortly after that, and then they arrived in Ireland in 1169, and I think that's probably where modern Irish history, most people would say, began. And it wasn't always a difficult relationship with England. The Normans, as we'll see, were just part of a wave that was coming across Europe at that time. Now, I'm going to talk about something which I call the ethnic stack. This is something that I came up with myself, and it is a way of describing, if you like, the ethnic background. You could dig further on a lot of new DNA studies being done to show the different groups within these islands and further afield. But if we look first at the four, and again, excuse me, simplifying to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, because there are regions within those areas that have slight differences, but largely they're the four kingdoms, if you like, on these islands. Initially, as I pointed out earlier, we were all pre-Celtic people who came to settle on these islands, and probably largely the same with a very similar culture. Ireland and Scotland then are part of what they call the Q-Celtic, and this is a language difference, and the Welsh and the English, the people of that time, spoke a language which was slightly different. If you travel to Wales today, you'll see Welsh is very prevalent in Wales, and in Ireland, particularly in the west of Ireland, you'll see the Irish language. They're related but quite different, certainly in appearance. The Romans then arrived, and they arrived into Wales and England, followed by the Anglo-Saxons, who were only in England, and I'm talking in modern day terms here when I talk about England. The Vikings arrived, and their imprint in Ireland and in Wales was relatively small. In Scotland, it was stronger because they raided into the islands in the north of Scotland and settled there. They also settled in England in very large numbers and mixed more with the local people. Then the Normans arrived, and again, a slight aside from my own point of view, the Normans are one of the great forces of history. They're an extraordinary group of people. They were incredibly adaptable, culturally adaptable as well, and they bear study on their own. The group then that you see on the diagram, which is on the right side of the picture, this is what we now think of as the English. And of course, the English then colonized the rest of the two islands, and we ended up with the entity now known as Britain, and Ireland was part of that.